Hi everybody, Curtis Mitch here from the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology, and welcome back to another one of our weekday reflections on today's Mass readings. Today is Monday, July 5th, and today's reading comes to us from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9, verses 18 to 26. Now, just a quick reminder, folks, if you feel like these reflections are helpful to you, please click that subscribe button below along with the notification bell, and then you'll know automatically each time each new reflection is posted. Now, today's gospel is the story of two miracle stories, and the two stories are sort of intertwined, one with the other, where Jesus heals both a grown woman as well as a little girl. Okay, and the grown woman is healed of a chronic medical condition. It says that Matthew tells us that she had a flow of blood. And then the little girl is actually raised from the dead. And one question we might ask just at the outset here is what ties these two events together? Why are they interlocked in the way that they are? Well, for one thing, we know that these both miracles took place on the same day. Okay, in fact, one miracle Jesus performs on his way to performing the other one to fulfill the request of the ruler. So they happen right, back to back, right at the same time. We also, it's also hard not to notice that both of the beneficiaries of Jesus' healing power, in this case, are females, right? In other words, gender is a significant thing. Jesus has been healing blind men and raising up other men, but here he's showing us that his saving power is also for women, and it's also for both the young and the old. And so we have a mature woman as well as a little girl. And then there's one more thing that we don't actually get from Matthew's version of this account, but you can see it if you look at the parallel in Mark's gospel, and that is the fact that 12 years is the significant thing that sort of ties the two together. That the woman had a hemorrhage for 12 years, and then the little girl who died and was raised from the dead happened to be 12 years old. And there's probably some theological or spiritual symbolism in that 12 is the number of Israel. Israel has 12 tribes. And so part of what this story is trying to tell us is that Jesus has come to heal the people of Israel, to impart new life to the people of Israel and raise them up again. But let's get into the story, and then we'll see what God wants to teach us. We begin in Matthew chapter 9, verse 18. While Jesus was speaking to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt down before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a hemorrhage for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, "If I only touch his garment, I shall be made well." Jesus turned and seeing her said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And instantly the woman was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a tumult, he said, "Depart, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went out through all of that district. So Jesus heals two people, a mature woman and a young girl. The mature woman, we're not told her age, but we are told that she's had a serious medical condition for more than a decade, for 12 years. And this is what Matthew calls a flow of blood. Now, we don't know with 100% certainty what that means, but biblical scholars are pretty much agreed on the fact that he's probably talking about some sort of menstrual irregularity or disorder of some sort. And that's a significant thing if that's the case, because it brings out a whole nother dimension to this story that we might have otherwise missed. Okay? To have a flow of blood for 12 years, of course, would be a great physical burden on this woman, no doubt about it, right? She was not in good health, right? She was probably tired all of the time. She may have had an iron deficiency and those kinds of things that come with that sort of condition. But if this is a menstrual condition in particular, then the law of Moses says something important. It shows us that this woman was not just carrying a physical burden, she was also carrying a religious burden. Because a menstruating woman was not allowed to enter the temple and was not allowed to participate in the worship that took place there. She wasn't allowed to be part of the public worship of the people of God. She was permanently excluded. Okay, a woman in her monthly time would only be excluded until after that time was over and she underwent the rites of cleansing and that sort of thing, and then she could be reinstated into the worshiping community of Israel. But to have a chronic condition for 12 years meant that she hasn't been to the temple in at least 12 years. She hasn't worshiped in at least 12 years. So there's a physical burden, but then there's also the religious burden. And as a consequence of the religious burden, one can very easily imagine a psychological burden pressing down on this woman. Okay, because a woman in this state was considered to be ritually unclean. She was also considered to be contagious. In other words, other people could not make contact with this woman or they would be unclean. And so she's probably struggled with a lot of isolation in her time, a fair amount of loneliness because other people wouldn't want to touch her either. And so she's got all of these burdens stacked one upon another, right? The physical condition itself, the religious burden of not being able to worship, and then even the psychological burden of being isolated from the community of God's people. Okay, and so this is what Jesus lifts from her shoulders when the power goes forth from him and cleanses her, all right? She reaches forth in faith and touches just the hem of his garment, even the slightest graze of her fingertips gives her access to the power of Jesus. And the real thing that gives access here is, of course, the touch, but it's the touch in combination with faith. Jesus says, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has saved you." Jesus is not limited in his ability to heal us and restore us, but we sometimes limit his ability to do that because we lack faith. And so this woman shows us that by opening ourselves to Jesus and believing him, we actually have access to all of the benefits that he wants to give to us. So that's the woman with the hemorrhage. Then there's the young girl who died. We're told that a ruler comes to Jesus. We don't know much about who that ruler would be in Matthew's gospel. But again, if we read this in light of the parallel passages in Mark and Luke, we see that he's actually the ruler of a synagogue. Okay, so he's a local religious leader in charge of the local synagogue. Okay, and his daughter has died, and we know that she has died because the father has already done what is customary to do in that culture, and that is to hire professional mourners. Right? That's who those flute players are at the house. There are people wailing and making lamentation. There are people who actually were paid for their services to do this, to kind of advertise for a family the fact that they had just lost a loved one. All right, and they were kind of leading the way in mourning the death of this individual. But again, the man is not deterred by this. Right? He hires the mourners. His daughter is dead. He's going through the normal rites that you would undertake as a Jew to in a sense arrange a funeral for the death of a loved one. And yet it doesn't quench his faith that Jesus can heal. He is confident. He believes, like the woman believes, that if there's just a little touch, if Jesus puts his hand on her daughter, that she will be raised from the dead. And indeed she is. All right, he goes to the house, Jesus puts his hand on the daughter, and in fact brings her back to life. What these two episodes, these two miracle stories, I think show us is that Jesus is the incarnation or the physical embodiment of God's saving power. And we can look at that from two different perspectives. We can look at that from a Jewish perspective, and then we can look at that from our own Catholic perspective. From a Jewish perspective, Jesus is doing something here that you're not supposed to do as a faithful and devout Jew. You're not supposed to touch what are the sources of ritual uncleanness, okay? So a menstruating woman was declared ritually unclean, and so you couldn't and shouldn't make contact with her, physical contact. Likewise, the little girl who had died, a corpse communicates uncleanness according to the law of Moses. In fact, it's the most serious form of uncleanness. You become impure for 7 days, and you have to go through a week-long rite of ritual in order to be reinstated into the covenant community of God. Okay? But the curious thing, the ironic thing here, is that Jesus, the most faithful Jew who ever lived, touches a woman and touches a corpse, except he's not defiled in the normal way, because Jesus has this overpowering holiness that overcomes the sources of impurity. All of a sudden, the woman's flow of blood stops when she touches the garment of Jesus. All of a sudden, the young girl is no longer a corpse when Jesus places his hand on her, because his holiness overpowers the impurity and the death that cause uncleanness in the first place, okay? So that's from a Jewish perspective. This is a very surprising thing for Jesus to do and a remarkable miracle that he performs. But think of it also from the Catholic perspective, right? I can't help but think about the Eucharist. I can't help but think about Holy Communion, that we too, as Catholic Christians, have an opportunity to touch our Lord Jesus in faith every time we go to Mass. And we need to remind ourselves, I think, that the humanity of Jesus, that is to say, his physical body, his flesh and blood, his humanity is a sacrament of salvation. It's the instrument through which his divine power is channeled out into the world, all right? And so miracles happen. This is what this episode, I think, tells us today and reminds us, is that miracles happen when people touch Jesus in faith. And so the next time you're in line for Holy Communion, summon your faith. Believe in Jesus. Believe that Jesus can heal you. Believe that Jesus can impart life to you. Believe that Jesus can raise you from the dead. Well, I hope this reflection was of some benefit to you. I pray that God blesses you, your family, and your day. And I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Thanks.